The Holy Gospel according to John, the 2nd chapter. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is it to you or to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And the servants filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Christ.
This is a well-known, well-loved story. I always get excited when we get to talk about it, get to preach it. But I think the funnest thing about it, the part that I love most, is at the core, it's a story about Jesus at a party. Jesus, our God in the flesh, as a wedding guest. Now, can't you just see it? Jesus and the disciples going up and flapping their arms for the chicken dance, or struggling to cut that rubbery entree with those dull table knives, making sure that all 12 of them got their name on the card for the Instapot they gave as a group gift for the couple. But that's Jesus. He's right in the mix of things, coming to be one of us, even in the smallest minutia of our daily lives, even down to being a guest at a wedding. So a little background on weddings in that time and place. They were a week-long event celebrated by the whole community. And hospitality is a very big deal in the culture in which Jesus and the disciples lived. So to run out of something for your guests would be a breach in that hospitality, and it could bring shame on the family hosting the wedding. And just as hospitality was a big deal, so is shame and honor in their culture. So that family could forever be marked then as, the ones who ran out of wine halfway through. And that could be accompanied by whispers and snickers and a little pointing over the years. So there are Jesus and the disciples at this celebratory shindig, and everyone's eating and drinking and laughing and having a good time. But not everyone, because it seems somehow Jesus' mother, also in attendance at the wedding, has learned that the wine has run out. Now, some Bible scholars speculate that this wedding may have been a relative of Mary and Jesus, and that would explain why they're both invited to this wedding together. So therefore, her concern over the serious predicament could really be a concern for her family's shame. But whether it's family, whether it's a close friend in the community, Mary thinks that it is important enough to tell Jesus this detail. Now, Jesus, on the other hand, doesn't seem too concerned at all. In fact, his reply feels quite disrespectful for us hearing what he says to his mother. "Woman, what is it to you or me? My hour has not yet come." It's uncomfortable when Jesus talks like that. And we want to try to explain it away, to say, he didn't mean it like it sounds to us. Well, maybe that's true, but maybe not. Maybe he's telling Mary to stay out of it. Mind your own business. Let the people that this is a problem for handle it themselves. Either way, there is a difference of opinion here. And that last part about his hour not yet coming, we understand the load that sentence carries. The hour of his death. Or really more like the hour that is the beginning of the series of events that will lead to his death. So maybe he can solve the wine issue, but is this really the way to kick things off? Is this the moment to provide the sign that points to Jesus as the one who's come into the world for the sake of the world? Here, in the middle of this week-long wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. And so now this is another part of the story that I love. Just as Jesus seems to ignore her concerns about the wine, Mary seems to ignore his objections about doing something about the wine. She turns to the servants and she says with confidence, "Do whatever he tells you." This is another reminder of Jesus' humanity, his participation in all the stuff of everyday life. Jesus, like you and I, has a mother. And she's holding him accountable to this situation. She knows he will take action because she knows who her son is. Not who he is as someone who has these supernatural, magical powers to just fix the situation. That's not even really a tiny little part of it, not at all. No, who Mary knows her son is someone who cares, someone who has compassion, someone who's concerned for community and for relationships, and someone who is about joy and celebration and life. And so now that Jesus knows, he can't pretend he doesn't. Jesus can't ignore it. He can't sit idly by and let the wheels come off of this wedding. And Mary's right. Because Jesus orders the servants to fill some large jars with water. Now, sounds like a simple command, no big deal, but I'm sure the servants weren't too thrilled, given the amount of water it was going to take to get all 6 of those jars filled up to 30 gallons. But they got it done, because when it's time for the steward to have a taste drawn out of these jars, a taste of the water that's been turned into wine, well, it's there. But it wasn't water, it was wine. And it wasn't just wine, but it was the very best wine, not to mention 180 gallons of it. So disaster's been averted. Only it seems that no one really realizes it. Well, except for Jesus and his mother, his disciples, and the servants. The party goes on. No one's the wiser. No one knows the wine almost ran out. No one knows where this good stuff came from. And that's another thing I love about the story. It isn't the host or the bride and the groom or even the head waiter that know. It's the servants. It's the ones who no one sees or pays attention to. They're the ones who get to see the sign firsthand. They're the ones who get to be close to the glory of God. So this week in confirmation, we were going over some of the things we've been talking about Jesus and who Jesus is. That's been our topic for this year. And one of the students made the observation that they just couldn't help but think about whether Jesus is back. I mean, we just don't know it, do we? We just might not see him if he was there right in front of us. We could miss it. That's the hiddenness of God. The glory that lies within the son of a carpenter, the son of this woman, Mother Mary, a wandering rabbi, a guest at a wedding. Now, usually the approach to the story is about abundance. The huge quantity of wine, not to mention the luxurious quality of that wine. And I agree with that. I think that's exactly a big part of what the story is about. But if the sign is to tell us more about God in the person of Jesus, abundance is definitely part of it. But what I think this story is really about, what I think this abundance is pointing us towards, is grace. This story is the definition of grace. Who is this random couple to unwittingly receive this incredible gift? In the humanity and reality of the moment, Jesus is in the right place at the right time to do what he could, knowing what he knew. And he did it. And that's grace. He had a choice. But true to himself, true to his identity as the one who has come that we might have life and have it abundantly, he chooses grace. And he does it every time. This Jesus, the Son of Mary, he chooses grace. Last week we heard the story of Jesus' baptism, and Pastor Wendell pointed out that Jesus did not need to repent for his sins. But still, he got into line. He followed the crowd, and he got into that river, and he was baptized by John, standing in that same water that had just washed so many others clean. And we can almost imagine the river as if it were clouded with all those sins. Jesus at the Jordan, standing in the midst of our brokenness, choosing to be in that water with us, choosing grace. And Jesus at the wedding stands in the midst of our joy, choosing to join us also in the good things in life, celebration and revelry and friendship and community. There, Jesus chooses grace, giving the best, the very best. Now, in the scene to follow the wedding, this hour that Jesus has spoken of will indeed come. And it'll be no quiet sign, but a very public ruckus. His anger at a system that promotes an absence of grace. The animal sellers and the money changers that are making a business out of the devout and faithful Jews coming to offer sacrifice. Making a business out of those who would worship and repent before their God. And Jesus drives them all out, upsetting the system, even if it was only for a day. True to who he is, unable to see what he sees and know what he knows, and not take action in defense of God's grace. Grace that is freely given and not a commodity on trade. That public action will now start the clock ticking on that hour. It draws attention from the people in power, those ones who would snuff out the light that shines in the darkness. The ones who cannot fathom what grace really is because they can't imagine that they need it as much as everyone else. From the beginning of John's gospel, we come to know Jesus as the Word made flesh, as the light that shines in the darkness, as the one full of grace and truth, the one through whom we have received grace upon grace. Jesus brings grace and then goes one step more. Grace upon grace. Grace is water into wine, but grace upon grace is 180 gallons of the very best wine. And grace is the cross, our crucified Christ. The grace upon grace is the empty tomb, our risen Christ. This week, scanning through, you can see the motion, right? I can't even talk about it without making the motion. Scanning through my phone, scrolling through my phone, I saw a quote on Facebook. And I wanted to share it with you because as soon as I read it, I just thought of Jesus and Mary and their awkward conversation right away, and then Jesus doing what he did and Mary knowing that he would do it. And these are the words. Do things for people not because of who they are or what they do in return, but because of who you are. And that's attributed to Harold Kushner, who's a rabbi. Because of who Jesus is. The Word made flesh, the light in the darkness, the one who is truth, and in that truth, the one who can only bring grace upon grace. So what's our part in all of this? We who are the beneficiaries of the very best wine. We who live in the hope and promise of resurrection. What's our part? Surrender. Surrender to grace. Trust it is yours. Receive it with open hearts. Taste it in the bread and drink it in the wine. Dip your hands in the waters of grace as you mark the sign of the cross on your forehead. And live in the freedom of grace and be changed by grace. Like the water was changed in the very best wine. Be changed by grace. For all the grace that you have received, there are that many opportunities to be a sign of grace to others. In this world of division, of shutdowns and standoffs, children of God, be true to who you are. In those moments where you know what you know, do what you can. Surrender to grace and then give it. Amen.